Welcome to JonGetsGames. This is the variety vlog for December 2016, and as you can see, I'm going to cover quite a few different things that happened over the last month, so feel free to skip ahead to the part that most interests you, or stick around for the whole thing. I'll start with a general update for the channel, and as always, a super brief Patreon update. There were 9 new backers that were added onto the campaign over the last month, which is just awesome, and one pledge that was up to the producer level, so that's just great. The ball keeps on rolling. It's just a wonderful amount of support that just keeps on coming in, and I love seeing it. Moving on, there is a new podcast around. It is created by myself and my friend Efka. It's called Last Place, and it's essentially us recording the Skype conversations that we were already going to have about the games that we like to play. Over the last year and a half, we've become really good friends, and we've had many hours-long conversations about board games and just the various tangents that we find ourselves into, and we have a really good time with it. So we've decided to record those and just condense them down a bit. So we have 2 episodes out so far that are both about 45 minutes long, and as I said, it's pretty much just a conversation about a couple different games and the experiences that we've had, funny stories, and just sometimes we talk about issues that we maybe have seen with the game or not. Some of these games are ones that I may in the future do full reviews for on the channel, and he as well, but it's just another take, a more conversational take on these games. So feel free to check that out. Again, it's called Last Place, and you can find it pretty much anywhere you can grab podcasts. And lastly, with this covering December, it is obviously the end of that year and moving on to 2017. And I gotta tell you, I'm looking forward to making some more videos. I feel like all I've done over the last 2 months, and this is actually accurate, all I've done is 5 vlogs and 1 somewhat controversial review for Great Western Trail. I want to record some playthroughs. It's been 2 months since I've done that. It's been 2 months since I've even put, I think, any of those out, or about that much. Work is somewhat slow for me going forward for the next 5 to 6 weeks, so hopefully I'll be able to crank out a bunch of videos. I have a lot of playthroughs I want to get to, and some reviews. I think Feast for Odin and Terraforming Mars are 2 that I think are probably going to come out at some point in the next couple weeks. I think I've played those games enough, and I have quite a bit to say about those. So yeah, look forward to seeing some more videos. Let's now move on to a new segment that I think I want to work into many of these variety vlogs, and that has to do with your opinion on some subject. And for this month, I would like to know your opinion on the number of times you think a board game reviewer should play a game before they actually do a review. When I first started filming videos almost 3 years ago, I always mentioned how many times I'd played a game. But back then I was reviewing games I'd played a ton of times, so I felt confident. I was like, I've played this game 12 times, I'd play this game 18 times. And that felt good to say. But once I started really gearing into reviewing new games, like new games that are coming out quite often, I found myself to the point where I have pretty much a minimum of 3 plays before I record a review, and oftentimes I do only have 3 plays in before I do these reviews, and very occasionally I'll do a review after only doing 2 plays, and that's honestly only if I really dislike the game and I want to give my opinion out there, but I never want to play the game again. But I will never do a review after just 1 play, and I'm just curious what you feel about that. Is 3 enough for you guys? I don't think I'm necessarily going to change how I do this, but I want to be a little more transparent, and I think for 2017 I'm going to mention in all of my reviews how many times I played the game before I actually go into it. So yeah, let me know what you think, and now let's jump into the questions and answers section. So I got 3 questions from you guys over this last month. The first one comes from Sabin Schmidt, and he asks, as someone who is a self-proclaimed cult of the new gamer, do you have any games in your collection that surprise you on how long they've maintained their spot? With your constant revolving door of games, have some past their shelf life, yet they still seem to find a way to make the final cut? This is a pretty cool question, and unfortunately, I didn't start tracking my acquisition dates on games until a couple of years ago. So even though I've recorded all the stuff on Board Game Geek, I kind of have to go off my own memory for some of the older games that I have. And I wrote a couple down that I still have in my collection, even though I've had them for a long time. We've got Eclipse, Abandoned Ship, Sid Meier's Civilization, Indigo, Fluch der Mummy. There are probably some more, but these are just an idea of some games that I've had for a long time, and they've made lots of cuts as I continue to cull my collection. But the reason I mention these is because I barely ever play any of these games anymore, but I would have no problem playing them again in the future. Like, I just be so hard-pressed to get rid of Eclipse because it's such a wonderful space opera style game. It's just I don't sit down to play long games like that very often, but I want to have that tool in my game collection for the occasional time when I'll bust that out. Abandoned Ship used to get played all the time. It's this wonderful dice game by Reiner Knizia about trying to race rats so they don't get sunk on the ship as it's sinking down. It's a really cool game. It's a great game to introduce to new people, but it never really hits the table anymore, but I'm still hard-pressed to play it, and I wonder if part of the reason I've kept many of these games is because they just look so great as well. They have good component quality. With Abandoned Ship, you have this awesome ship on the board, and you kind of slowly sink it by pulling it down, and the water level rises as you're playing the game. Eclipse, you have this gorgeous expanding galaxy in front of you with ships and technologies and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. It looks really cool. Indigo, I think, is, well, it's also Reiner Knizia, interestingly enough, but it's his take on Suro, and this is a wonderful game of putting paths down on a board and moving gems all around, and again, it's a gorgeous game. Let's see, Fluster Mummy is not necessarily gorgeous, but it has a gimmick. It has a playing field that's face up in the middle of the table. It's a one versus many game, but the many are also competitive, so only one person's going to win it, and one person plays the mummy running around trying to catch these explorers who are inside their tomb, and the mummy doesn't know where the explorers are, but the explorers know where the mummy is, and it just has this wonderful tactile, magnetic vibe. I barely ever played this game as well, but I see myself keeping this one for a very long time, and I think a big part of it has to do with the cool gimmick. For instance, I think that this game can be played well with kids who are like maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, and it's just cool to have a neat tactile game that's going to have a bit of a toy factor going on there as well. And let's see, what's the last one I mentioned? Yeah, Sid Meier's Civilization. I loved that one when I first got it, and that one might end up getting cut sooner than these other ones that I mentioned, just because I play these long games so rarely these days, so I kind of have to be choosy with which ones I'm going to grab, and I probably want to play Through the Ages over Sid Meier's Civ, but it is surprising how long this one has continued to make the cut, which is why I think that goes along to answering your question. So I think that wraps that one up. Let's go to question number 2. This one is from Talal Shaheen, and they ask, how were you introduced to the board game hobby? So my origin story for board games, I guess if you go way back, I loved games when I was a kid. In fact, I have a couple games in my collection that I played when I was a kid. For instance, Can't Stop and The Amazing Labyrinth. I played those when I was very young. They were grabbed from a Goodwill. I have very faded, like 30-year-old copies of those games. But I pretty much stopped playing board games by the time I was like 8 or 10 because I just never really had anyone to play them with, and I fell in love with video games, and I was obsessed with video games for a couple decades. And it wasn't until 2008 that I really came to board game again, because I'd been hearing about Settlers of Catan for years, and I finally have the opportunity to try it, and I just fell completely madly in love with it, and I played the game with the same group of 3 people, like once or twice a week for like 8 to 10 months, then we got the expansion, then we played a bunch, and then the expansion is what got me into Board Game Geek. That's how I found Board Game Geek, was trying to look up to find expansions for Settlers of Catan, and from that point on, it's just been a crazy explosion. So yeah, it was 2008 was really, I think, when I fell head over heels in love with board gaming. I'd say the stuff when I was a kid, most kids play games when they're kids. I just happened to have a couple good ones when I was a kid. I also played a lot of Life and Monopoly and Risk, and those games are terrible, in my opinion. I don't like those at all. So yeah, 2008, Settlers of Catan, like so many other people. I don't have a interesting origin story, but there's a reason so many people have been brought in through that one particular game. I loved it back then. I barely ever play it now, but it really got me into this thing that I love so much. And question number 3 also comes from Talal Shaheen, and they ask, what were your very first 10 games, and were they hits or misses? So this question is actually quite similar to question number 1, and I really tried to go back and figure out what my first games that I acquired were. It's kind of hard, and I only came up with 5 that I'm sure were in my first 10 games that I grabbed, and so let's talk about them. The first one was Dominion. This is the first board game that I bought with this new wave, because I actually went to a board game night at Endgame in Oakland. It was just kind of a meetup thing, and I showed up there, and for the first time I was super nervous. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any games besides Settlers of Catan and I think Stone Age at that point. And so I sat down and I played Dominion with all these people, and I just fell in love with it. And I walked downstairs and I just bought a copy right there. So that one was definitely a hit. I think I still have it in my collection. It never gets played anymore because I'm just kind of over it. Like the amount of new cards. I have Intrigue and Seaside, so only 2 expansions. But even there, I don't know, there's just so many other games I'd rather play. Honestly, other deck builders I'd rather play, but I still loved Dominion when it first came out. But this was just the first new game that I bought. However, already I had Stone Age and Tuluva. So these were 2 games that were given to me for Christmas, and it's because I'd done some research online and like put them on my wish list as I was growing out of Settlers of Catan. And I don't own Stone Age anymore. I actually gave it to a friend, so it's kind of still in our friend group, but I played that game like over 30 times, and I kind of feel like well, I mean, obviously I liked it if I played it 30 times. I think it is an exceptional game. I just think that its shelf life with me had ended. I would be fine with never playing it again, although I would totally play it again. It's just, I've kind of been there and done that. And with Tuluva, I actually still have that on my shelf, and I guess that one could definitely count for the first question, now that I think about it, of games that have lasted for a surprisingly long amount of time. I think a big part of that's nostalgia. For a while, Tuluva was my favorite game, but I've definitely moved away from abstract style games to the point now where I never really played again, and also I played that game like way over 20 times, I think, maybe even 30 for that one as well, so I kind of feel like there's not much else new there for me. Then we have, Settlers of Catan. I went out and bought my own copy. The version that I've been playing for like a year and a half when I really started branching out into new board games was my friend's version. In fact, I bought the Cities and Knights expansion before I owned the base game because I bought it for my friend so he could put it into his copy. And it wasn't too long before I actually bought my own copy of Settlers and Cities and Knights. In fact, I've done that twice because my first set was stolen out of the backseat of my car when someone smashed in my window. Why would someone steal board games? I don't understand. But anyway, the fifth one I wanted to mention was Tichu, and this is a tiny little card game. And it was a huge hit. I haven't played it in a year or two at this point, but I have like 75 recorded plays of this. And when I started recording plays, I had already probably played this game 30 times. So this is probably the only game I've played over 100 times, which is a lot considering this game can be an hour to an hour and a half long. And I still love it. I never really play it because I'm just constantly playing new stuff, but I have no problem sitting down to play this because it's just a brilliant climbing style game of trying to make different sets in your hand and then play those cards in such a strategic way to go out first and make these really awesome adrenaline pumping bets as to whether or not you're going to go out first, and then you also have a partner, so you're playing off a partner. It's just such a cool game. It's definitely a hit. I still have that one in my collection. So I guess what I'm trying to say is most of the early games that I can remember anyway were hits, and maybe that's why I don't really remember the ones that I got early and got rid of. This is back when it's a bit fuzzy and before I really logged everything into Board Game Geek. So I hope that does a reasonable job of answering your question. Let's now shift over to the Games of Note segment where I discuss all of the new games that are new to me that I played over this last month, or maybe a game that wasn't new but had a particularly interesting play. I have sorted these from the most fun to the least fun over this last month, but spoiler alert, I had fun with every single one of these. It was a really good month of board gaming for me, so I'm not really going to be trashing any of these games, but we can go ahead and start with the first of these, which is Solarius Mission. Now, I was able to play this one twice so far. The first game was 4 players and the second game was 2 players, and this is a 3X style game. So it has this space vibe where you are going out and kind of exploring around space, and you're getting some technology, and you are also turning goods into other things and just kind of expanding, but there is no extermination in this game. It is a Euro in that you're really not directly interacting with your opponents on the board at all. Like, there are a couple of things you can put down that maybe will slow your opponent down. They can't quite go there. They have to kind of go around or go a little bit farther. But for the most part, you're kind of doing your own things all on this these space areas. And it has this really great dice drafting mechanism where you roll these dice, roll one die at the beginning, or I guess at the end of your turn, and you put it on this little wheel, and the wheel just keeps incrementing. And every time you push it, it makes the dice that are still on that wheel more valuable the longer they've been on there. And on your turn, all you do is take one of those dice and evaluate it, and then do a secondary action. Now, there is a lot going on inside this game, and the rules are almost great, and then the very end, they kind of fall all over themselves trying to explain these outposts that are a pretty important aspect to the game. I'm not going to go into the details of how the game plays too much here, but I will say it was a bit frustrating figuring out the rules at first, but then that first play was a lot of fun, although it was long. It took us like 3.5 hours, I think, for the 4 of us, which blew me away because I had heard that this game was somewhat on the quicker end. But about a week later, I got to play a 2-player game with one of the people I played it with before. So we were both familiar with it, and we finished the game in about 1 hour and 10 minutes. So that made me much happier. It looks like this game can actually be about 30 minutes a player, which is what I was hoping it would be. But it probably takes a play or two before you actually get to that point. So when you bring in new players, it's probably going to be more like 45 to 50 minutes because it feels a bit convoluted. It feels like it's hard to do the things you need to do, but once you figure out how to do that, it's immensely satisfying. So I'm looking forward to exploring this one quite a bit more, and it was great to see that it worked really well as a 2-player game as well. Game number 2 is Manhattan Project Energy Empire. So you can pretty much ignore the Manhattan Project of the name. This is a thematic sequel to Manhattan Project, but it's very different. And I did not like Manhattan Project really at all. It just completely failed for us. I never did a full review of this one. I played it at least 4 times, and it just flopped for my group consistently over and over again. So I ended up selling it. But I really wanted to like that game, and this new one has some similar vibes to the old one, certainly with theme, but also a bit with an interesting worker placement thing going on. But the engine building in Energy Empire is actually wonderful, and this is a really fun game. We had a good amount of time playing it. It was a 4-player game. It went a bit long, and a big part of that was because I was a bit shaky on the rules when we first started. In fact, I got a rule pretty wrong at the beginning of the game. Took us about a third of the game to figure it out, and we tried to fix it. I was not pulling pollution correctly, because what you're doing in this game is running a little energy empire, and as you are building an engine in order to make more energy and do all these things, you're going to be polluting this environment in front of you with air, land, and water. And you can use the land and water to drill for oil, but then also putting pollution down means you're going to score less points when you actually score for these different things. So it has some really cool stuff going on, but really the crux of the thing that I loved about this game is that the board is split into 3 different spots, and each of those locations has, I think, 4 or 5 different worker placement spots that you can go onto. And the way the engine building works is when you go to one of the middle section spots, for instance, then you get to do that action. But if you have any buildings that you've built in front of you that are matching color with that middle section of the board, you can run those buildings as well. So you have this great combo engine style thing going on as you're playing the game. You're building new buildings to put down in front of you so that in future, when you do other actions in that area, you get to activate those buildings again as well. By the end of the game, I was doing a bunch of stuff on every turn. In fact, the way the worker placement works in this one is you're constantly putting workers out, and then when you have put them all out, you need to kind of reset and pull them back. But people are doing this at different times, so it's not a setup and clear style worker placement game. And I was near the end of the game putting out pretty much all my workers in one turn and then clearing them almost every single round. It really seemed to come to a really cool climax point, and I'm looking forward to playing this one more. I've only have the one play, and I want to play it correctly the whole way through, but right from the get-go, I've been quite impressed with this one so far. Game 3 is First Class, which is another thematic sequel. It's kind of like Russian Railroads, the card game, although I've never played Russian Railroads, so I can't really tell you how similar they are. I can tell you both of them use trains heavily in the theme. And the way First Class plays is it kind of feels like a worker placement game without any workers, because you are putting out a bunch of cards into the middle of the table as an open pool draft style, and on your turn all you do is take one of those cards and put it into your area in wherever it matters. It might be an action, or it might be something that actually adds to your trains or something like that. So it has that worker placement vibe because it's like you're going to a spot before anybody else can get there. Also, it has a really cool thing going on where you have 3 rows of 6 different spots you can take. And depending on the player count, once a certain number of those cards are pulled off, the rest of them clear off and they're removed entirely. So again, the game is all about this indirect interaction with your opponents, with trying to grab the cards that you need while also denying those cards to your opponents, essentially denying those spots. And one really cool thing that's going on with this game is that it comes with 5 different modules, and you pick 2 of them every time you play. So the variability right from the get-go seems pretty great. Like, you can mix and match as much as you want. And I've played 3 games so far, 2 of them with the starting A, B modules, which the rulebook tell you to do for the first game. And for the 3rd game, we actually played with C and D. So let's talk about really high level what's going on here. You are building these 2 trains, and then you're also kind of building a route. And every other turn, you are going to score the route and score the trains. The route gives you lots of cool bonuses, and the trains just give you straight up points. You're going to play 6 overall turns, so you're going to do the scoring 3 times. But what these modules do is really influence how the game is going to play. So for instance, one module can put these 2x modifiers down so that that train will score, that specific car will score twice as many points, or that specific action will evaluate twice. You have another module which just gives a bunch of these contracts to fulfill, which are just goals. You know, you're trying to get to a certain threshold on certain things, which is kind of fun, like trying to jigger things around to really match those things. But then you get some much more interesting modules. With the 3rd module, you have a murder mystery where you actually deal out face down cards to every single player, and one person is going to be the murderer, and they're hidden throughout the game. And as you are playing the game, each person is taking suspicion and giving suspicion to each other because somebody has died on this plane, and there's kind of an ongoing investigation. And at the end of that game with that module, you see who was the most suspicious person, and they just lose. They get arrested by the police. Even if they had the most points, they lose. And the person who was the murderer, well, they have to take some extra suspicion, so it's more likely they will lose. But if they don't get arrested by the police, they get a 20-point bonus. And then you have another one which is going to make a little engine with the trains that you're building, so that the more of these passengers and luggage you put in, the more points and money you generate throughout the game. There's just honestly too many cool things about this game to really go into in this somewhat small segment. I am super excited about this game. The first 2 plays blew me away. The third play, it fell a little bit flat for me. Everybody else enjoyed it with the murder mystery and the passengers and luggage. I'm not quite sure about the balance with those things, but I love that they're there, and I'm looking forward to trying those again because the bones of this game, the stuff that's going on, is so cool. And so I'm looking forward to playing this one. Oh, shoot, I almost forgot to mention, this is a quick game. When I played a 3-player game where all 3 of us had never played before, it was like an hour and 10 minutes. I played a 4-player game where 3 people were new to it, and it was like an hour and 15 minutes. I'm hoping to get a 2-player game in soon, and I think it might come in at under 30 minutes. So it's great to have all this wonderful Euro-y interaction, great stuff to think about, lots of planning, in a super quick game. Game number 4 is SeaFall, which is one of the newest legacy games that came out last year, I think around Gen Con, and we have a group, we've been planning on playing this pretty much ever since we got the pre-order copy, but we haven't been able to until finally just about a week and a half ago we sat down and we played the prologue and the first game of it. And I'm not going to do any spoilery type stuff in this little intro here, but I can tell you that we had a pretty good time with both of these. Both of those games took about 2 hours to play, and this was a 5-player setting. And I've heard that 5 players is probably not ideal for this game, so far it wasn't too bad, although there was quite a bit of downtime between our actual turns. I mean, it came in at about 10 to 15 minutes before I got to take another turn as it was going. But fortunately, there's enough interesting other things going on that I could watch, because while this is a Euro game where you are sending out your ships to islands to pick up goods and then sell them for a profit and upgrade your ships and build buildings and all that kind of stuff, it's also a game about exploration. So when you do these exploration actions, you're going to be rolling some dice and then reading from a storybook that essentially tells you a bit of a story. Like, you know, your people come across a big pile of bones. Do you mess with the bones or something like that? And based off of what you do in every single one of these exploration things gives you a choice. You get one outcome or another, and you can sometimes see what's coming. Like if you be mean, then you can kind of anticipate that something is going to come back and hurt you, but maybe you'll also get a benefit. But it's cool to see those different exploration style things happening. These games, we haven't really seen much of the game yet. As I mentioned, the prologue was sort of not really a game. It still took a while because we were learning the rules and consulting the rulebook like crazy. I think by the time we get down to sit for our second full game, we'll jump into it very quickly because the rules are not that difficult in general. And this game has something pretty cool going on that I haven't really heard too many other people mention with much detail, and it has to do with the central mechanic of hiring advisors. So what you do on your turn is you have the option of hiring an advisor from an advisor row or using an advisor you already have, and they give you a perk for that whole turn, and then they go away and they're gone until the year ends, and every year is 6 full turns. So what it means is you're kind of doing engine building by grabbing these advisors. For instance, in the second game, I went heavy on buildings. I decided for various reasons I wanted to build buildings like crazy, and so I kept drafting these advisors that made buildings cheaper. And by the time we reset for the new year, I realized, well, I built all my buildings and all of my advisors were oriented around building buildings, which meant my engine was kind of exhausted. Like, all these advisors didn't really do much for me. You don't need the advisors to do your turn. You can do other stuff, but they are great because they modify your specific turn to let you do different things. So maybe I should not go so hard on one specific type of thing in future games where I anticipate us going through maybe a couple of these years while we're playing, because the advisor deck could run out. I'm sure new advisors will show up as we start to unlock stuff, but as of this current mode we're in, it's an interesting take on modifying your turns and being cognizant to not accidentally find yourself building an engine that is not necessarily long-term viable for you. I actually came in 3rd place in both of the games so far, so I think 3rd place out of 5, that's not too bad. I'm looking forward to seeing how this game develops. I'm looking forward to seeing specifically some of the unlocks and the legacy style stuff to see how it's going to modify the game. Game 5 is Adrenaline, which came out at Essen last year from Czech Games Edition, and the style of this game is a Euroized first-person style shooter. I guess technically it feels a little bit more of a third-person style shooter, but it pulls these things in very well, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. What's going on is you're just running around this tiny little arena. It reminded me of playing Quake Arena and that kind of stuff way back when I was a kid, and you're just running around, picking up guns, loading them, and shooting each other. And it has this interesting thing going on where you don't really need to aim. Like, as long as you have line of sight and you have the right number of distance, then you can hit your opponent with whatever weapon you have. But every time you do that, you have to then reload your gun. So essentially, all of these weapons, I guess not all of them are guns, have one ammo, so to speak, before you can use them again. And they do a wide variety of stuff. It's a fun little game where you are vying to essentially occupy the damage totals of your opponents, because every time someone dies, points are going to be scored based off of how much damage each person did to that person who just died, as well as a little bonus for being the first person to kill off that person. So you are trying to damage everybody so that you can score points when everybody dies, but you're also trying to weigh that with being in the majority of the damage on specific players when they die so you get more points. It was a pretty neat little juggling act as we played it. It was a 4-player game, and I loved the variety of weapons that are in this game. They vary all over the place. There's like a railgun that can go through walls, there's like flamethrowers, there's rocket launchers, there's a plasma gun, which I use very well, which lets you run and then shoot, and it also has this other neat thing where as you take more damage, you get new and better actions that are available to you, which is, I think, why it's called Adrenaline. Like, as you're taking damage, your adrenaline pumps up, and now you can do more stuff, which is pretty neat. I look forward to playing this once more. It didn't necessarily blow me away, but I had fun with it, and I think a big part of that is because I really enjoyed first-person shooters when I was a lot younger, and I don't really enjoy them that much these days, mostly because I've lost all those motor controls, and also because board games are way more interesting, but I love the nostalgia. It really did feel like a first-person shooter, and just the crazy run around shooting each other like crazy style deathmatch play, which is the one that we did, and I'm looking forward to playing this once more. Game 6 is America, which I got for Christmas, and I've been able to play once so far. And this is a trivia game that has been board gamified really quite well. I was interested in this game, which is why it was on my wish list already for Christmas, and I enjoyed it more than I was even expecting to, because I like trivia okay. I'm honestly not very good at it, but a lot of my friends are quite into trivia. I actually met my wife Jess through a trivia group, so trivia is somewhat important to me. And many of the people I like to play games with already, there's some crossover there. And so what's going on in this game is it's all about American trivia, but it has this great thing going where you only do 6 questions throughout an entire game, and the game comes with like 320 questions. So I don't think you're going to run out of questions. You're not going to see the same one twice, certainly not remember the details from it by the time you do. And what you do on your turn is you just try to answer the question with a little cube and you put it out onto the board. Each of these questions is essentially 3 questions at once based on a specific theme. And so I guess there's 320 themes and 3 times that many questions in the game. And every single one of these themes has a state answer, a time answer, and a number answer. And on your turn, you just put a cube down onto the timeline, trying to say, I think the answer to this question is, 1905. Or you could put it on a state. You say the answer to that question is Alabama. And then lastly is the numbers. You say, I think it's 100 million or something like that. And on all these spots, there is a varying degree of a catch between these. Like, it might jump from 10 million to 100 million. And if you put it on that spot, that's a really big range that you are essentially calling, because nobody else can put cubes down on a spot that has any other cubes. But you score points for being correct, and you score points for being next to the correct answer. So if you don't know the answers, well, maybe you try to figure out who is most likely to know the answers, and then you put your cubes next to them as well. And we really enjoyed it. It was a good time. We played the full game, and I was winning 4 turns into the game. I was amazed. I was like, how am I winning? And I didn't score a single point on the last 2 turns of the game because it's a 6-round game, so I ended up going from first to last. But the person who was dead last at that 4th turn ended up winning the game. They had a tremendous last 2 turns, so it was cool to see that if you are doing poorly or doing well as you're playing the game, it does not mean that you're necessarily going to win. You could totally whiff like I did. And yeah, it was a really good time. I don't know how often this one's necessarily going to come out, but when it comes to trivia games, this is probably the best one that I've ever played. Next up is Fabled Fruit, which I also got for Christmas, coincidentally enough, and we played a 5-player game of this, and what's going on here is you have a very simple worker placement style Euro game where everybody has a single worker, and at the beginning of the game there are 6 worker placement spots, and all you're trying to do is go onto these spots to let you modify this hand of cards you have by drawing some new ones or maybe swapping them around in order to do some set collection. And the first person to do 3 of these set collection completions is going to win the game. So if it was just that, I would not be interested at all because that's just quite a bit basic. But the real catch, the hook for this game is that it is an evolving game state as you play game to game. It's sort of like a legacy style thing going on, but you're not permanently altering the game because as you complete these little stacks, because what you're doing is when you go to these action spots, you can either do the action or you could take a card off the top of that spot to complete the set collection on the bottom. So there are 4 of each of the cards that are out in the playing area. So once 4 of a specific set are gone, then that action actually disappears. And every single time any card is pulled off the area, you pull a new one from the top of this humongous deck, and you gain a new spot that has a new set collection thing that you can do to cash in, but also a new action that you can activate. So we played a 5-player game. It took probably about an hour, and it was fun. We all really enjoyed it, and I think we pulled out 3 or maybe 4 new actions as the game went on. And the really neat thing is that all those cards that were cashed in get put into a separate bag, and you put all these cards back on the top of the deck, and the next time you play, you set it up exactly the way the game was the previous time you played, and then you evolve from there. And supposedly it takes about 20 games to get through this whole stack of different actions. So it's kind of like you're playing a slightly different game every single time you sit down. It's got a very basic backbone, but then some cool revolving flavor of different rules, sometimes somewhat significant rules changes to the game as these different little cute animals come out. The theme is really weird. It's just a bunch of forest animals trying to make fruit smoothies. I don't know. It's fun. I enjoyed playing it. I look forward to playing this one quite a bit. I'm curious to see what else is going on there. I'm not sure if I will shoot to play with 5 players in the future. There was quite a bit of blocking going on. You could go where somebody else is, but you have to pay them a card, which can be somewhat costly. I think I'm hoping to play this one at 3 and 4 quite a few times to see what kind of variety and different stuff the game has to offer in the future. Game number 8 is Colony, which I really didn't plan it this way, was also a Christmas gift. I played a 2-player game of this with Jessica, and we both had a good time. This is an engine building game with a whole bunch of dice rolling. I actually had the predecessor to this game. It was called Art of War. No, Age of Craft, not Art of War, Age of Craft. And we played it once and we liked it, but it was a Japanese import. It was very hard to figure out what you're supposed to do because of the language barriers, and the component quality was absolutely terrible. So I was pretty excited when I found out that that designer was teaming up with Ted Alspach at Bezier Games to make a new version that's a bit modified and much prettier and has, English in the rules and all that. So we actually sold the Age of Craft game with anticipation of getting Colony, and now that we have it, we had a good time playing this at the 2-player count. However, there is a lot of analysis paralysis potential in this game, and not a whole lot you can do between turns. I guess you can do some planning when it's not your turn, but I think I am hoping to play this game at 3 players, but I will never play this game at 4 players. And I think it's probably best at 3 players, honestly, because there are some buildings that let you trade your resources back and forth, and trading is going to pretty much never happen in a 2-player game. So I feel like this game feels like almost a 3-player only type situation, but it'll of course be a longer experience with that. So I'm looking forward to trying that one again at 3 players, and this one also has an immense amount of variety with the different buildings that you can build and put into your area in order to just generate more of these dice, which are resources that you use to build more buildings, and you're getting victory points on these buildings, and it's just a straight up race to a certain victory point threshold. So I like what I've seen so far. I'm looking forward to the variability. I'm a little concerned about the analysis paralysis problems, and hopefully we can get a 3-player game in coming soon. The 9th and final new game that I played last month is Flamme Rouge, and I bought this one with anticipation of hoping to cover it on the channel because it's kind of hard to find at this point, and maybe I've dropped the ball to a certain degree, but I'm hoping to get a full playthrough of this one filmed somewhat soon, because what you're doing here is racing your bikes through these different tracks trying to win the race, and everybody has 2 of these bicycles out on the track, and it has this really neat deck deconstruction thing going on where everybody starts with an identical deck for each of their, you have 2 different decks because you have 2 different racers. One, I guess, is more of a sprinter, and one is more of a, I guess one is slow and steady, and one is just, about big bursts. So they have 2 separate decks, but everybody's slow but steady deck is the same, and everybody's sprinting deck is the same. And on your turn, you just draw a couple of these cards, and then you pick one, and then the number on there shows you how far you move your little racer around, and then that card is permanently removed from the game. So every single time you take a turn, you are permanently discarding these cards from the deck, which means that you are, especially if you're getting rid of these really high value, very quick cards, you are reducing your overall energy as you play the game. So it really does a good job of feeling like you're getting more tired as the game goes on. And then it has some other neat rules like drafting. If you're, one space away, you can kind of move up and get some free spaces. And if you are at the very head of a pack, you take these exhaustion cards, which aren't that great, but they're also not the worst thing in the world. I think I've only played the game once. And honestly, the reason it's at the very bottom of this list of games I played this last month is because it didn't quite work, and we realized at the end of the game that's because I built the track wrong. So it's completely on me. So the play experience was okay. I think I will enjoy it far more the next time I play it because I'll play the game correctly. I built one too many hills based off of what I should have done, and it really skunked the first half of the game. And so I was a start player. I started at the beginning of the line, and I ended up winning the game, which felt a little bit weird, and the person who was in the back, it didn't quite work, and I was very happy to see that the error was my fault. So I'm looking forward to giving this one some more tries with accurate track setups. You do have to be careful to make sure you're building these tracks carefully. They appear to have quite a bit of intention built into them. In fact, I looked at all the other tracks to see if any of them mirrored what I did, and none of them even came close to it. So that's totally on me. This is a neat, relatively quick game. I don't play racing games that much, so I'm looking forward to playing this one correctly in the future. Let's now go into the shifting shelf segment. This is where I show you all of the new games that I acquired over the last month, and also all the games I had to pull off of my shelf and put underneath my bed in order to make room for these new games. And I think a lot of people asked me to talk briefly about the games I got rid of and why, so I will do that super briefly now. So the first one is Vast. I did a full playthrough for this game. It is an incredibly asymmetric dungeon crawl style game where one person plays a knight trying to kill a dragon, one person plays a dragon trying to escape, and all that kind of stuff. And I love the idea of it. I backed it on Kickstarter, but it just was way too long. It was like a 3-hour game with 4 players, and the rules complexity, it's very hard to teach. So I'm really glad I played it. I'm glad I got to experience it, but I am okay with not playing it again. The second game is Crazy Carts, which I did a full review of last year, and if you watch that, you'll have some pretty good ideas as to why I ended up getting rid of it. I felt like well, first of all, it is a fun, chaotic racing game where you have a partner and you're both trying to pilot this car together, but one person controls the speed and one person controls the wheels. We had a lot of fun with that part, but there was so much extra stuff that's just kind of crammed on the game, like doing a qualifying lap and having these items and all this stuff. I feel like the game needed a big amount of streamlining, and I could house rule these things, but I just ended up not being that enthusiastic about getting it to the table again. It hasn't been played since, so I decided to get rid of it. Next, we have Great Western Trail. I did a full review of this last month, and it is certainly the most controversial review I've ever done. It didn't really work for me or my group. I don't think it's a bad game, but it just did not work out well for us. We didn't really enjoy it that much, and apparently we're in the extreme minority. And if you want to see some rather interesting discussions, you can look at the Board Game Geek and YouTube channel for those. People are really going at it about my opinions on that game, but either way, I am okay with not having this one in my collection anymore. I played it 4 times. Didn't really work for us. I'm actually going to be giving it to a friend of mine who is in my gaming group, so I will have the opportunity to play it again if I want to, so it's not going very far. Now we have Dynasties, which I also did a full review of last year. I actually realized subsequently that I had gotten the setup rules wrong when I was playing every single one of the games. So my opinion in that review is a little bit tainted, and I had to put annotations up to show that. But at the end of the day, I think it would be much better if you play it correctly. I was forgetting to give starting resources to everybody, so it was much slower and it felt a little bit more random than it should have been. But a big part of that game is area control, and I'm not crazy about area control in games. If it was a game that was all about the iSplit you choose in a Euro setting, I would definitely keep it, but with so much being like having more of influence in one country than the other person, it's just not one that interests me that much, so I got rid of it. Next we have Splendor, which came out a few years ago to a humongous amount of fanfare. I really enjoyed it back then because I love engine building games. This is a very basic, bare bones engine building style game, and I liked my plays of it. I played it many times, and I just feel like I'm not that interested in actually playing it anymore in the future, so I took it off the shelf. And lastly, we have Garbage Day, which I never did a review of a playthrough for, but I talked about my impressions of it in a variety vlog. It's a dexterity game of like piling trash on top of this actual little trash can on the table, and when the cards fall down, you take a bunch of points. It felt fun and silly, but also a bit longer than it should have been, and not actually that compelling for me, so that's the reason I got rid of that one. Also, it was a little trash can, so it was kind of awkward to fit on the shelf, so it was not that hard of a decision to actually end up pulling it off. So with that, we've reached the end of the variety vlog. Please weigh in with your opinions on the question I asked about the number of games you think reviewers should play. Also, I'm curious to hear your opinions on some of the new games I got, some of the new games I played, and the games I got rid of. Just let me know what you're thinking, and I'm looking forward to all of the great stuff that we're going to be getting to in this next year. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting the channel through Patreon, including all these producer-level pledges. If you too would like to directly support the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Also, if you'd like to see more of these monthly variety vlogs that I do, as well as in-depth board game reviews and full game playthroughs, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.